Hey, this is Brock from Eagle Crest Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you how I can turn this scrap wood into a beautiful end grain cutting board. Let's get started. Now the first thing we're doing is we're cutting all the scrap wood to 1 inch. So what we're doing this, and the reason why we're doing this, is because we want to make sure all of our height when we're doing this end grain cutting board is going to be the same. This is possible with or without a planer, but ideally a planer is used in this situation. So as you can see here, I'm making these cuts, and I do not recommend doing this because my techniques for doing this are apparently unsafe according to people on the internet. So as always, do not try this stuff at home unless you're a professional and know exactly what you're doing. So now that I have all my strips cut, I'm gluing them and then flipping them on their side so the ends are together. Now this is one of my favorite parts because you kind of get to see how the board's going to look from the beginning. There's no particular order I'm using here, and I'm just making kind of a random pattern depending on what I think looks best, but also realize I'm going to be making multiple other cuts and multiple other glue ups as well. Now once you tighten this up, you want to leave it sit for about 24 hours, and then you can remove your clamps to make sure the glue is dried. From there, it should be good to go, but occasionally you will have a situation like this where it sticks, but a little bit of elbow grease is all you need to get it taken care of. Now that I have my pieces generally set, I want to cut off these extra pieces that I have here. So I set it up first to clean off these extra pieces of wood and glue that I have on the top. And then also too, I'm going to come back with the hand sander and sand this up so it's nice and flat. This is also a situation where if you have a hand planer, that's really good as well, or a planer that's a bench that you can just send it right through. Next, we need to pop off these little edges here. So we want a nice clean edge when we go to cut on the table saw. So what I'm doing here is making a square line and then just cutting it right off so it's a nice smooth edge. But see this little guy? This is going to be an issue later, but I'll explain why at the end of the video. Now I want to call out something here because my techniques are not necessarily safe for how I'm cutting, but it seems to work for me. So I don't recommend doing this at home, but as you can see, the piece I'm cutting is not really secure and there's no force being applied to it. So there's a chance this could actually kick back on me, which would send this object flying back at me. So I don't recommend doing this, but as you can see, I'm standing away into the side of the board. So if something were to fly back, it should miss me. But once again, do not try this technique. Ideally, you want to be putting pressure on the piece of wood, but I just don't really do that. Anyways, moving on. Let's look at this cutting board. So now that we made our second cuts, we are doing a second glue up. What I'm doing now is using the Type 1-2 glue and spreading it out over this cutting board and then smoothing it as well so all spaces are covered. Once I flip these on these sides, I'm going to clamp them up real tight, just like I did before. And the one thing I want to point out is as I'm tightening it, you want to make sure all your pieces are square. So I'm using this board as a reference to make sure all the end pieces are together. Now I talked about this before, but when you clamp it up, sometimes it does stick a little bit, which is not the end of the world. So I just grabbed a piece of wood here and just smashed it out. Once it's loose, it's going to pop off because it's just glue. So it's not the end of the world if this happens to you, but if you can be a little bit more clean than I was, you'll have a better chance. Now to make sure all my edges are clean, I wanted to get a fresh cut. So what I did is I took 1.25 inches off of each end to make sure it was nice and smooth. Now remember this little guy I was telling you about? This is where it's an issue. So because I was using scrap wood, there was a groove in this, and it's not a big deal, but now there's a groove in one piece of my cutting board. So what I'm doing now is actually using a mixture of glue and sawdust to patch that little hole. And the good thing about this is you won't even notice there's anything missing. So once I mix it in and let it dry, I wait about 40 minutes and then actually just scratch it off, and most of it comes off. And then from there, I sand off whatever else is needed. This is a great technique if you have little issues or little defects in your product. Now to get the perfect corner, I actually already have a stencil that I made before, and what I'm doing is just clamping that stencil to my board and then using the jigsaw to get a rough cut. From there, I'm using my Ryobi sander, and this is just a simple little pivot to round off the edges and make sure they're nice and smooth. This is one of my favorite techniques to get a consistent and accurate and also clean rounded edge. Now a cutting board wouldn't even be complete without a nice round over edge. So what I'm doing is using my router and a 1/4 inch round over bit to give both the top and bottom a nice rounded edge. This is pretty simple. It just takes a little bit of practice. So what I recommend doing is working on some scrap wood before you go into your actual project. Now remember that piece I told you was going to be a pain? Here it is coming up again. So now that piece is on the edge and it looks like I made a big defect into my wood, but actually it's just part of the wood. But I want to repair it, so what I'm doing is using a small router bit to actually drill into the side of what's going on here, and then I'm using my chisel just to clean up the edges a little bit. Now that I have this carved out, what I'm going to be doing is putting a piece of scrap wood in there and then just gluing it back up so this piece doesn't look like it's missing and so we don't have a giant gash right in our wood. Now I found the easiest way to do this was just to trace the hole on a piece of wood. Pretty simple, right? So what I'm doing here is using a pencil just to trace the outline, and then what I'm going to do is go to my sander and just sand a little bit off so my piece matches. And this is a pretty simple, it only took me about 5 minutes to do, and it makes the wood look a lot better when it's all said and done. So we're doing a test fit, all fits up good. Now all we need to do is add some glue, add some sawdust, and then clamp it on, and we should be all set. For projects like this, I recommend adding an excessive amount of glue because you can always sand or scrape it off. But the worst thing is when you have a joint that's weak, especially on the edge like this is going to be, that's going to fall off. That's the last thing you want, so make sure you use a generous amount of glue. Now once we clamp it up, we just want to let it sit for 24 hours so it can be nice and solid and dry, and also strong when we use this cutting board down the road. Now just to show you a close-up, here is what it looks like when it's all said and done. So you can see there's plenty of sawdust on that, still plenty of glue, and once it dries, it'll be nice and solid. We can just cut it off and sand it and we should be all set. So the next day, I just took my jigsaw and cut a rough edge off of that. And then from there, I'm using my hand tools just to shave it up till I get a nice edge on this. You could use the router again, but I feel like it's a little bit too aggressive, and I like to do this by hand because you can control it and take your time when doing some detailed work like this. Now the last part for this is just to sand the entire top. So we're going 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, all the way up to 200 before we add our mineral oil, which is great and makes the project pop. Now all I'm going to say about this is make sure you read the label, make sure what you're putting on is safe because you are going to be using this for food. So you want to make sure it's food grade safe materials. Now once that dries, you're going to put on a preservative, which is the wood wax. And this is what used on butcher's blocks, cutting boards, a bunch of different items. And it really helps seal in and protects the wood. Once you rub it in, you get it all looking nice and shiny, nice and protected. And this project will last you for many, many years. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments and look forward to the next video. Thanks.